everyone. Welcome to the 40th annual Roy Rogers Festival.
Well, welcome everybody to the Roy Rogers Festival. This is the 40th anniversary. It's a big year. We got lots of guests, lots of vendors, and we're here to talk to somebody quite special today. Many of you may recognize her from a lot of different TV shows, including Dallas, and there's a couple of new things that you did I just thought was wonderful. Claws, I thought was interesting. The clip I watched that was just hilarious. If you haven't seen it, make sure you go look at these. It's a wonderful show. And you may recognize her from the Harold Lee Kumar. And so, without further ado, I want to welcome Mary Deese-Hampton. We were talking when we first met, and I said, well, I started doing some research and looking into your career. Of course, we're here to also pay tribute to your wonderful husband. And Deese-Hampton was just about in everything iconic you could think of, from the 60s all the way through the 70s. Absolutely, give him a hand, folks. We're doing some right now. And he played in so many different things, but then we started talking, you were talking about your career. I started doing some research and looking at my IMDb and other research things we do. And you've had such an incredible career. I said, it's hard to put this into one interview because there's so many different things we could talk about. And there's so many different aspects of your career and his career. They just about stand everything in Hollywood. And it's I thought, let's just start and be good. How did you and Deese-Hampton first meet? Now, I actually got to meet him a couple of times, and he told me I could call him Jimmy. So I'm not being too forward. I'm going to refer to him as Jimmy from here on out, because James just sounds so odd, wonderfully friendly guy. So tell me about how you first met.
Well, it's kind of an odd story. Neither of us drink, but we met in a bar. And a friend of mine who was in an acting class of mine when I moved to LA worked in this little dive country western bar in Burbank called Jack's Cinnamon Cinder. And back then, line dancing, if you may remember, was very popular in 93, 94, and I And she kept after me about, oh, why don't you come to the bar? We got good food. And I just, I was not interested in going to a bar by myself. And so a friend of mine happened to be visiting from out of town, and my friend called and said, oh, come out to the bar. There's this actor here who I can't remember his name, but you would know him, and he's from Texas. And so because I had a friend visiting, I said to her, would you just go with me? Because this girl is so nice, and she's always asking me to come to her little bar. And so we went, and Jim was there. And so we just became fast friends. And I was talking to somebody, I don't know who it was, yesterday. Jim and I would come on Thursday nights and play this video game. I guess it wasn't really a video game. It was a trivia game that was hooked up across the country in different. And we were the Texas Tornadoes, and you paid $5 and you got a keyboard. And I was really, really quick typing. I had been a legal secretary for a long time, and we were like number 3 in the country. And I was talking to somebody yesterday who said I was in a bar in another state, and he said, we were playing you guys every week. And he said, you were always winning. Was it you? Oh, sorry, I knew it was someone. I was very admired. And so that was golly, the small world. So we would, and Jim said to me, he said, you know why we're going to be such good friends? And I said, why? He said, because I know everything that happened before 1975, and you know everything that happened after 1975, so we're going to make a really good team. So that's how we met.
Well, that story was kind of ironic about it. I heard tell that story in a different interview, and I thought, the Texas people, we used to play the same game as Buzz Time Trivia at the same time they did. And we would come in 4th or 5th in the nation, and they would come in 3rd. And so I said, I used to cuss you before I ever knew you. So it is amazing in a small world. And you said something a while ago that kind of, you mentioned about Jimmy B, that she said, you'll recognize him, but you won't know his name. I remember hearing a story about Johnny Carson. What was that one?
So Jim was, I think he was only 32 episodes of The Tonight Show. Johnny just loved it. And he would have him on for no reason. Jim wasn't necessarily on a junket or, so lonely he was, promoting or anything like that. Johnny just loved it. And sometimes Jim said he would get a call and they'd say, Jim, you want to be on the show tonight? And he'd say, sure. And he'd go down there to Burbank in the afternoon and sit in the green room. And he said sometimes the producer would come back there and he'd say, wow, we kind of ran out of time. Jim said, okay, because they just gave him a $600 check and he'd go home and come back the next night. But yeah, one night, Johnny did not like to prep his guests. So the people knew why they were on there, really, if they were promoting something, but he liked everything to be fresh. And he, to his surprise, Jim knocked on the dressing room door. He said, listen, my wife and I were watching TV last night. You were on something. And she started pointing, and she said, hey, that actor's been on your show. I thought, oh gosh, what's his name? Oh, you know, what's his name? And Johnny wouldn't tell her. And so he got this idea, and he said, when I introduce you tonight or this afternoon, he said, I'm not going to say your name. So we play along with that. Jim said, sure. He said, so Johnny does the big intro, and he says to the audience, he says, this next actor, I believe that all of you are going to recognize his face, but I'm not going to tell you his name. And so he said, actor, will you come on out? And Jim comes out from behind the curtains, and everybody applauds. And Johnny said, oh, hey, all of you who recognize this actor from a television show or movie, he said, stand up. Everybody stands up, everybody. And he said, okay, all of you who know this actor's name remain standing. There was like 3 people in the audience that stayed. So Johnny made the entire audience put their hand over their heart and pledge to remember the name of James Beatty. And probably, isn't it great? And so I know. And Jim said for years he would see people in a mall or the grocery store or something, and they would say, I took the pledge. So that's that story.
Didn't I hear you say one time that was it a grocery store? The guy actually approached you and said, I remember that show, but he was in the audience that night?
Sort of. So we moved, when Jim retired, we moved back to Texas, where both of us were raised, and a sorority, and there was a sorority party, and we went, and the husband of a woman at that sorority party had been a college student on spring break and was actually in the audience. Didn't see it on TV, but the first person that was actually in the audience that day that Jim had ever met. So small world, small world.
If she told you he also played Buzz Tide Trivia, then we would have a whole circle here. Yes.
What was your favorite set to work on?
Okay, it's not a tough one. So I grew up watching General Hospital, and I was in the sorority house watching the Luke and Laura wedding. If anybody remembers that, do you all right? And yes, and so when I was asked to be a recurring character on General Hospital, they were both still on the show. And it was that was the big thrill for me. I just couldn't believe that I was working with 2 actors that I so admired. And I'm going to segue this into, if nobody heard this story, about Jim working on Macintosh and TJ with Roy Rogers. He, was a huge, like everybody, was a huge fan of Roy Rogers. And when he got the call from his agent that he was being considered for a role in what nobody knew was going to be Roy's last picture, but a film with Roy Rogers, he was thrilled. And it just, he got the script and he opened the script up, he was reading it, and he had to be a bad guy. And he did not play a bad guy very often in his career. And he was very upset that he was going to have to be the arch nemesis of Roy Rogers, but he did not want to pass up a chance to work with Roy. So that was a huge thrill for him. I know, one of his top 10, things they worked on.
Well, and when we talk about General Hospital, of course, that was such an iconic show, but we have to mention Dallas because you were also on Dallas, and it was the rebooted series, which I thought was excellent. I really did. I think had not Larry Hagman passed away, that show had another few years left in. I know I was just like I was the original. What was it like working on that?
Well, I did 2 episodes of that show, and it's the same kind of thing. You're just working with people that you watched, and my character I was Sue Ellen's banker, and so I worked with her. I worked with some of the newer cast that were on there, Jesse Metcalf and Jordana Brewster. And it just, again, it's just one of those kind of thrilling things where you just can't believe that you are working with people that you watched on TV when you were younger. And how did I get here?
And everyone here, I'm sure you've all heard Second Degrees or Kevin Bacon. But we were talking about that the other day. It's like if you think about it, Jimmy Hampton worked with just about everybody. And so just about everybody could be tied to him. So what were some of the people that he used to be good friends with that you got to also?
Oh my gosh. Jim did a lot of charity work, and he played in a lot of celebrity golf tournaments where folks paid to play with celebrities, and all the money was donated to charitable causes. And he did that for 35 years. And, so as when we got married and I began to go to the events, I mean, just the musicians, like Cootie and the Blowfish and Loverboy and Alice Cooper. We played in Alice Cooper's tournament. He had so many friends in the industry. Well, there you go. You never know about Jimmy Hampton. Glenn Campbell. I just, my mind is spinning now. Members of the Eagles, sports figures, Johnny Bench, a lot of several basketball stars. And he just had such a wide variety of friends and people that loved him. And the book that was published, thank goodness, before he passed, is a book full of wonderful stories about working with, Doris Day and Jimmy Stewart and, of course, Burt Reynolds and just, so many different people and on so many different shows. Man, it's working with Efren Zimbalist Jr. and Mike Connors and all those people, some of whom I met, some of whom I did not get to meet. But, there was a journalist that said that Jim was the Kevin Bacon of his era. And when you've been on The Tonight Show 32 times with Johnny Carson as a link, that's probably true. He was invited to 3 presidential inaugurations, and he just was so beloved. And I just going to these shows are, I wasn't sure after Jim passed. It was suggested to me that why didn't I go, because I had a lot of pre-signed autograph photos and memorabilia, and I wasn't sure that he loved doing the festivals and Comic-Cons and celebrity events because he loved connecting with his fans. And one of my favorite things that he said to me, he said, when you're on stage, which Jim did theater as well, he said, when you're on stage, you get that immediate response from your audience. Like I'm looking at you guys and I'm getting that response. You're nodding, you're clapping, you're laughing, what you're doing. And he said, but when you're doing television film, come on, you do your job and we go home and you don't know, how it's going to be received. And he said when he came to the festivals and did the Comic-Cons and celebrity events, when people came up to him and told him how much they enjoyed him in a television episode or a movie that he did, he said he called it delayed applause. It was like, oh, there's, that's what they got. Now I know 30 years later or 40 years later, somebody bought the movie that I ever knew Jim to sit in the theater you watch. I was with him when Sling Lake came, and we went to the theater together and saw it. And he was squirming, not because he didn't think the movie was going to be good, but he just, a lot of actors, myself included, we don't like watching ourselves because we just pick at what we did. Oh, that facial expression, or I shouldn't have turned that way, or look at all my chins, whatever it is. And so, but yeah, he sat in that theater and watched that movie, and of course just loved it. So.
Well, you had brought up a name that's associated with it quite a bit. And I think he met Burt early in Burt's career. I think we actually got to walk the access streets of Dodge, the old T-70 warranty that's just about it on. But he met on the set of Gunsmoke, did we? What was that?
So Jim's, this is unbelievable. When God has a plan for you, sometimes it's like it's going to happen no matter what you do. And Jim, I'm going to go back a little bit and I'll get to that place. But Jim had been an art major in college. And his brother, who was 4 years older, had been an art major as well. And he became quite the famous artist. He was an illustrative artist. And he graduated and ended up going to New York. And he worked for Esquire magazine, New Yorker magazine, etc. And so Jim thought, well, there can't be two famous artists in a family. And all the pretty girls are in the speech and drama department. So I'll just switch to speech and drama. So that's how he got interested in acting. But anyhow, he left college and went to New York, and he had been in the Naval Air Reserve all his years in school, but he got drafted by the Army, and he thought, oh, this had to be a mistake. So he showed up, and no, it wasn't a mistake, and he called his brother, and his brother knew somebody who worked in Lyndon Johnson's office. And so there were phone calls made, and Jim got called into a general's office, and the general said, well, I understand there's some paperwork mistakes here, but sorry, kid, you're in the Army now. And he said, what if there's anything I can ever do for you? And so Jim said, I'd like to go to Europe. And so off to Europe he went, and he said he was sitting on the Czechoslovakian border, and he just was praying, and he said, what am I doing here? What am I supposed to do with my life? I had this plan, I was going to be an actor, and he said the next day he got a note and was back to headquarters in I knew it was Regensburg in Germany, and somebody had seen his resume or his paperwork and saw that he was a speech and drama major, and then somebody to run the spotlight at the special event shows. And so there he goes. Well, 3 months later, the fella that was the head of special services left to go back stateside, and he said, here, Jenny, give me a jar. And so he was involved in the acting world in the Army, and then went back to New York. And when he was in New York, he was taking acting class. This young lady in his class came up to him one day, and she said, I'm doing this short subject film, and I think he'd be great for the lead. Here, call this guy. So Jim called this guy up, and the guy said, well, I actually have somebody else in mind for the part. And Jim said, well, let me ask you a question. He said, do you have somebody to build your sets? Do you have somebody to paint your scenery? Because I was an art major in college, and I tell you what, I'll do all that for you if you let me have the lead. And the guy was like, okay. So they shot that little short subject film with no permits on the streets of New York City and in a set built in this guy's garage. And that little film got nominated for an Academy Award in 1962. And so all these, invitations from all these agencies started coming through. And Jim's pledge brother in college had been Pat Boone. And so he called Pat up, and Pat said, yeah, I'm coming out for the Academy Awards. He said, well, come stay with me. And Jim said, well, I need a tuxedo. He said, I got a tuxedo. He said, well, I need a car. Well, I got a car. So he goes out, and one of the agencies that wanted to sign him picked him up at the airport, and they go back to the agency office, and they walk in the door. It's the Conner agency. And Jim had asked Pat, he said, are they any good? And Pat said, I wish they were my agent. And so when they got to the office, I kid you not, this is how it worked for him. The other Conner brothers said, oh, isn't there a part for Jim would be right for in Gunsmoke? And the other brother said, well, yeah, I think so. Well, drive him over to casting. So Jim goes over to casting. Now, he has been there for less than an hour, and he is auditioning for the #1 show in the country. And he booked it. And that's where he met Bert. And he had been a theater actor, and he'd owned a little short subject film with some commercials, and he was on the set, and this was a big part. I mean, he was the major guest star. The episode was called Jeb, and he said he was was fine for the cameras to roll, and the director said, okay, Jim, we're going to be doing this, and so action. And so Jim starts talking, and the director says, cut, cut, cut. And he goes over to Jim, he said, Jim, watch the overlap. And Jim thought he meant talk faster. So, and action. Cut. Jim, just watch the overlap. And Jim was like, well, I don't know if I can talk faster, but I'll keep talking faster. And so he said Bert was standing behind the camera doing this. And he was like, and so when the director yelled action, Jim spoke more slowly and got through it. And so he said, Bert, just say, and they were friends ever since. And he will say, and I think he says in the book, he said, without Burt Reynolds, there'd be no Jimmy, man.
Yeah. He had been in town the one day. What must the other actors in that? I mean, you guys are.
Jim said when he was in the casting room that the other actors were talking amongst themselves, and they were saying things like, oh my gosh, I have been waiting for 3 years to get an audition on this. Oh, really? Well, I have been waiting 5 years. I have been wanting to be on the show. And somebody turns to Jim and they said, gosh, how long have you been waiting? And Jim said, what time is it?
And we had talked about the Gunsmoke side thing. I had also heard a story, and I don't know, do you know the old thing about legend becoming back with the legend? I heard a story that he actually, the way he got F Troop was that a casting agent went to the bathroom. Is that true, or is that section of school?
That is not true. Here's the truth. So they wanted to give Jim a recurring role on Gunsmoke. He'd already played the same character twice, and they really liked it. And he was in a bar. This is when Jim did drink. He was in a bar near Warner Brothers Studios or something, and there was a couple there, and she was from Fort Worth. Fort Worth was her hometown. And so they began to talk, and he doesn't remember. And like 3 days later, he gets a call from his agent who's furious, and he says, why didn't you tell me? They've been looking all over for you. And the husband of this woman from Fort Worth was a producer on a new show called F Troop that they had not cast yet. And apparently there had been some conversation at the bar that Jim didn't remember, and they had said, oh yeah, and he had said, call us, we would love you to audition you. And so that's the story.
Well, I was a bit off on that story, but I had heard that it's just one thing led to another, and also we had talked about, there was a story we're talking about, the Ernest Borgnine that mentioned something too. It's still kind of a mystery, isn't it?
We were at Jim knew everybody in Hollywood because he worked with everybody at some point or another. And we were at a big Texas Pride Year Weekend, which was the biggest horror sci-fi show in the Southwest at the time. And Ernest Borgnine was going to be a guest there. And Jim was so excited because they hadn't seen each other in 30 years. And there he was, and they were, just hugging each other and loving each other. And the woman who was with Mr. Borgnine leaned over to me and she said, we used to call him the wild meat. And I asked Jim, I said, she said they used to call him the wild man. What did she eat? And Jim was like, so I skilled her.
I learned to imagine, as laid back as it was, as friendly and gregarious, the wild man sounded like, a guy breaks furniture. Well, Loverboy came in and somehow he might have been partying with them somewhere. Did you want to laugh too? But yeah.
Say something. We got to go to the set of Gunsmoke, but it's barely still there. It's just pretty much wood now.
Yeah, of course that. And it's a private property. You can't go without permission. So don't go out there looking for it. But now,
in your career, I've got to ask about Evening Shade, because did Jimmy move into directing his Circuit Party School? Was it Evening Shade beginning of that?
So again, Burt Reynolds involved. Jim got a call from a casting director he knew very well, Fran Bascom, and she said that Burt had a television show called Evening Shade, and it was part of the writing production team who did Designing Women and Hearts of Fire and some other shows. And this episode involved a reunion, a high school reunion with Burt's characters' high school. And so Jim and Doug McClure, if anybody remembers great actor Doug McClure, they play high school buddies of Burt's. And so Jim gets on the set and he's there for a week. And, you know, everybody on that show, Jim was 54 years old at the time. And most of the actors on that show, with the exception of Mary Lou Henner, were older actors. You had Ossie Davis and you had Hal Holbrook and Charles Durning and Ann Wedgeworth. And so Jim was just kind of writing little jokes and telling stories. And Mary Lou Henner went to Linda Bloodworth Thomason and Harry Thomas and said, "You fire this guy because he knows what's funny for this age group." And Jim will say, "I believe that I was probably the oldest rookie sitcom writer in Hollywood to be hired." But he used to write a lot of Burt's like interviews, or if Burt was on the Tonight Show or something, he'd write little bits for him. And in fact, he was responsible for Burt being the first male centerfold in Cosmopolitan magazine. Do any of the ladies here remember that? Okay, so the story is this. Burt calls Jim, and he's just done Smokey and the Bandit. He's like the #1, movie star in the country. And he writes Jim, he's saying, he was dating Dinah Shore at the time. He calls Jim up, and he said, I've been offered to do the first male centerfold in Cosmopolitan magazine. And he said, my agent's telling me I shouldn't do it, and, that let somebody else do it first and see how it goes. And he said, Dinah's not real, excited about me doing it. He just doesn't want me to do something, a bad misstep or whatever. And he said, what do you think, Jim? And Jim said, well, what I think is nobody's ever going to remember who the second guy who did the centerfold. And he did it. And ta-da, so it worked out well for him.
Oh, absolutely right. And just had such a prolific career as a director. Yes. Then had this career. Now, when he started thinking about retiring, now I noticed your career, you've been busier and busier every year. What do you have coming up, Sam?
Jim wrote a screenplay with a high school friend of his, and that script has got some movement on it. So we're excited about that. And then I wrote a screenplay that we are going to be shooting what we call a sizzle reel. When you go to the theater and you see the trailer, we're seeing something that's already been made. And a sizzle reel is something you shoot in preparation for what they call a pitch package to try to get a network or a production company to buy it's to tease them, with interest. So we're going to be shooting the sizzle reel for my screenplay this weekend.
Sounds good. Well, of course, the book is available. It's available on Amazon. There's the website.
What and Get Up Show Business is available at my table. Okay, so the title is funny. So Jim came up with a title for a book. If I ever write a book, it's going to be called What and Give Up Show Business. And he had seen a comic strip. And the comic strip was of a circus that had come to town. And the people were on the sides of the sidewalk, and the different, parts of the circus were going down the middle. And it was the lion tamer with the lions. It was the bear, the dancing bear. It was the acrobats, flip-floppy, and the ringmaster. And at the end of all of this, there was a janitor who was sweeping up all the debris and the elephant poop. And somebody from the sidelines said, can't you find a better job than that? And the janitor says, what? And give up show business? So that's how we came up with the title. And you can get it on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, and at TCU Press. Thank you so much.
Well, I really want to thank you for taking it.
I do have to ask one question though, before I let you go. You'd mentioned that Academy Award winning film that he did at Gotti Spoke.
Didn't I hear somebody say that actually has been found recently?
Yes.
So about 10 years ago, Jim got a call from the Academy, and the original film, the reel of film from that little Academy Award-winning movie had been purchased, fortunately by somebody who knew what it was, at a garage sale in New Jersey. So that's amazing. It's now at the Academy, and it's part of their film library. Yes?
What was the subject of the short subject?
It was a movie originally called Cliff Dwellers. And it was a 15-minute short, and it was about, in New York City, all the buildings are really close together. And Jim's character was called The Boy, and then the female lead was The Girl. And he has the apartment direct, kind of like Rear Window. It was across the way from another building, and he could see this beautiful girl who was a folk singer. And the truth is that the guy that directed this kind of liked this girl. So he kind of wrote something real quick so she would, she could be in this movie and he could get to know her. And so the story is about how this boy goes about trying to meet this girl. And she comes, spoiler alert, he comes to his house and asks to borrow a cup of sugar. So that's how they end up meeting. But it's a comedy. It's very good.
Title now, say.
The title, I believe, at one time it was known as The Cliff Dwellers, and another time it was known as 1+1. And I'm not sure which it's known now, but it is now in the film library at the Academy. It's very, very an honor to have that be part of that.
Well, I want to really thank you for taking the time to talk with us, and I thank you for coming to the Roy Rogers Festival. I hope you all having a wonderful time. So how about a big hand for Mary Deese-Hampton? I could stay here and talk with her all evening. I know you. Thank you, folks.